Welcome to this advanced tutorial on callbacks in JavaScript. By the end of this video, you'll understand how callbacks work, how to implement them properly, and how to avoid common pitfalls. We'll cover everything from basic syntax to advanced use cases and best practices. So what exactly is a callback? A callback is a function that you pass as an argument to another function. Let me explain this concept in more detail. First, remember that in JavaScript, functions are first-class objects. This means they can be passed around just like any other value. Second, callbacks enable asynchronous programming. Third, they allow functions to be executed after another operation completes. Why should you use callbacks? Callbacks are essential for writing non-blocking code. First, they prevent your UI from freezing during long operations. Second, they allow you to handle asynchronous operations like network requests or file reading. Third, they create more responsive applications by not blocking the main thread. Now let's look at the basic syntax of callbacks. Here on your screen, you can see a function called greet that takes two parameters, name and callback. Inside the function, we first log a greeting message, then we execute the callback function. When we call greet, we pass Alice as the name and an anonymous function as the callback. The callback gets executed after the greeting message is logged. Here's a more advanced example. This function takes four parameters, two numbers, an operation function, and a callback. Inside the function, we perform the operation and then call the callback with the result. When we call calculate, we pass two numbers, an arrow function that adds them, and another callback that logs the result. The callback receives the sum as a parameter and logs it to the console. Let's look at an asynchronous callback example. This function simulates fetching data from an API. We use setTimeout to mimic network latency. After 2 seconds, we call the callback with some sample data. When we call fetchData, we pass a URL and a callback function. The callback gets executed after the data is received, demonstrating how callbacks handle asynchronous operations. Here's a practical example of how callbacks work in real applications. When we call fetchData with a user's endpoint and a callback function, the callback gets executed when the data arrives. In a real application, this would handle the response from an actual API call, allowing your application to continue running while waiting for the data. Let's compare callbacks to promises. With callbacks, you often end up with nested callbacks, which can become difficult to read and maintain. This is sometimes called callback hell. Promises, on the other hand, provide a cleaner way to handle asynchronous operations with their flat structure and .then chaining. Here's an example of callback hell. We have three nested callback functions. First we get a user, then we get their posts, and finally we get comments for the first post. This creates deeply nested code that's hard to read and maintain. This is one of the main reasons why promises were introduced. Here's the same logic using promises. Instead of nested callbacks, we chain .then calls. This creates a much cleaner and more readable structure. Each .then takes the result from the previous operation and passes it to the next function. Let's look at proper error handling with callbacks. The readFile function takes a path and a callback. Inside the function, we use the node.jsfs module to read the file. The callback receives two parameters, an error object and the data. If there's an error, we call the callback with the error. Otherwise, we call it with null for the error and the data. This pattern is called the error first callback pattern. Here's a common mistake with callbacks. On the left, you see a function that processes data and calls the callback with the result. The problem is that it doesn't handle errors. On the right, you see the correct version that uses try-catch to handle potential errors and follows the error first callback pattern. Here's an important tip. Always handle errors in your callbacks. This prevents unhandled exceptions that can crash your application. Remember the error-first callback pattern where the first parameter is always the error object, followed by the success data. Another pro tip. When writing callbacks, use named functions instead of anonymous functions. This makes your code more readable and helps with debugging. You can see the difference in the error stack traces when using named functions versus anonymous functions. For complex callback chains, consider using promises or async/await instead. While callbacks are powerful, they can become unwieldy when dealing with many asynchronous operations. Promises and async/await provide cleaner alternatives for managing multiple asynchronous operations. Let's summarize what we've learned. First, callbacks are functions that you pass as arguments to other functions. Second, they enable asynchronous programming by allowing functions to be executed after other operations complete. Third, proper error handling is crucial to prevent unhandled exceptions. And finally, for complex cases, consider using promises or async/await instead of deeply nested callbacks. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more JavaScript tutorials.